The sharp scent of espresso cut through the air of Berto's private office, mingling with the leather of the chairs and something darker, metallic, that I'd learned not to think about too much. My fingers fumbled with the stack of files I was carrying, and before I could stop myself, 3 folders slid from my grip and scattered across the pristine marble floor like cards from a clumsy dealer's hand. "Anna." His voice came from behind the massive mahogany desk, low and controlled, the kind of tone that made hardened men shift their weight nervously. But after 4 years, I'd learned to hear the difference between genuine displeasure and what I'd come to think of as his "Anna broke something again" voice. I know, I said, dropping to my knees to gather the scattered papers, my hair falling forward to hide the heat creeping up my cheeks. In my defense, you keep the temperature in here like we're storing wine, not working, and my hands go numb. Silence. Then, if I listened carefully, the barely perceptible sound of his jaw unclenching. I was 28 now, though most days I felt simultaneously older and younger than that number suggested. Older because I'd spent the past 4 years as secretary to the most feared man in the Italian Mafia's New York operations. Younger because despite everything I'd witnessed, everything I'd quietly filed away and never spoke of, I still managed to trip over my own feet at least twice a week. When I'd started this job at 24, fresh from a string of administrative positions that never quite fit, I'd been nervous enough to spill coffee on my interview outfit before even entering the building. Berto had hired me anyway, for reasons I'd never quite understood. His previous secretary had left abruptly, gone to visit family in Sicily, according to the official story, though the way people's voices dropped when they mentioned her suggested a different truth. "The annual company gathering is tonight," Berto said, and I glanced up to find him watching me with those dark, unreadable eyes that had probably sentenced men to death with nothing more than a slight narrowing. At 37, he wore power like a second skin, all sharp suits and sharper instincts. "You're expected to attend." I managed to stand without dropping anything else, a minor victory. "Right. The one where everyone pretends we're a legitimate import-export business, and not, you know." I made a vague gesture that was meant to encompass the entire criminal empire. "Yes," he said dryly. "That one." This was our dynamic, had been for years. I said things that would get anyone else disappeared to the bottom of the Hudson. He tolerated it because, well, I'd never figured out exactly why. Maybe because I was genuinely terrible at being threatening, and even worse at being threatened. "What time should I be there?" I asked, smoothing down my skirt, a simple navy thing that had survived 3 years of office work and still looked presentable. 7, and Anna. He paused, and I could feel the weight of his attention, even though I was studiously reorganizing the files in my arms. Try not to spill anything on anyone important. That's hurtful but fair, I admitted. The gathering was being held at Il Castello, one of the family's restaurants in Little Italy. Not the one where they actually conducted business, but the legitimate front that hosted anniversaries and communion parties. I'd been there once before, last year's company event, where I'd somehow managed to compliment one of the capos on his tie, while not realizing he was a capo, and thinking he was just someone's uncle who'd wandered in. Berto had found that particularly amusing, in his way, which meant his left eyebrow had risen approximately 1 millimeter. I spent the rest of the afternoon organizing his schedule, fielding phone calls with the careful language I'd perfected. "Mr. Berto is unavailable at the moment. May I take a message?" Translated to, "He's definitely doing something illegal right now." And, "He'll return your call at his earliest convenience," meant, "He'll call back if you're not already dead." My desk sat in the anteroom outside his office, a buffer between the world and the man who ran it. The space had become mine over the years, decorated with a small succulent I'd somehow kept alive despite my usual talent for killing plants. A framed photo of my parents back in their small town upstate, and a coffee mug that said, "I survived another meeting that should have been an email," which was darkly funny given that most of Berto's meetings definitely couldn't have been emails. At 6:30, I locked away the sensitive files, double-checked that the safe was secure, and headed to the small bathroom down the hall to change. I'd brought a dress. Nothing fancy because I didn't own fancy, but nice enough. Black, knee-length, with sleeves that hit just above my elbows. Safe, professional. The kind of thing that wouldn't draw attention. The restaurant was already filling with people when I arrived at 7:15, fashionably late by accident rather than design, because I'd gotten turned around on the subway. The main dining room had been cleared of its usual tables, replaced with clusters of high tops and a bar along one wall. Soft lighting created an atmosphere of warmth that seemed at odds with the reality of who these people were, what they did. I recognized most of the faces. There was Marco, who handled the family's interests in the construction unions, talking with Sal, whose legitimate job title I honestly didn't know, but whose real job involved making problems disappear. Teresa, who ran the books with terrifying efficiency, stood near the bar in a red dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. And scattered throughout were the younger guys, the soldiers, and associates, all in suits that fit too well to be off the rack. "Anna!" Teresa spotted me and waved me over with the confidence of someone who knew where all the bodies were buried, sometimes literally. "You look nice. Is that new?" 3 years old, I admitted, accepting the glass of Prosecco she pressed into my hand. "But I don't wear it often, so basically new." She laughed, the sound genuine. Teresa had always been kind to me, in a maternal sort of way, even though she was only in her early 40s. "You should dress up more. You're too pretty to hide behind those work clothes all the time." I felt my face warm. Pretty wasn't a word I associated with myself. Functional, maybe. Adequate. I had straight brown hair that never quite did what I wanted, brown eyes that were nice enough but nothing special, and a face that my mother called sweet, which I'd always suspected was code for not particularly memorable. "Where's the boss?" I asked, scanning the room out of habit. Berto's presence was usually obvious, a gravitational pull that drew attention even when he was trying to blend in. "Not here yet," Teresa said. "Probably making an entrance. You know how he is." I did. Berto timed everything precisely, including his arrivals. It was a power play, making people wait, but also strategic. He liked to observe who arrived together, who gravitated toward whom, reading the social dynamics like others read stock tickers. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of small talk and awkward smiles. I'd never been particularly good at social events, always feeling like I was performing a role I'd only half memorized. Someone asked about my weekend plans, and I mentioned maybe finally painting my bathroom, which earned me a confused look, because apparently normal people had more exciting leisure activities. I was contemplating whether it would be rude to leave after exactly 1 hour when I felt it, that particular quality of attention that meant Berto had arrived. The room didn't go quiet, nothing that obvious, but there was a shift, a realignment of focus. He stood near the entrance in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my car, if I'd owned a car. His dark hair was styled back, emphasizing the sharp angles of his face, and his eyes swept the room with the same careful assessment he brought to everything. Our gazes met across the space, and I felt the familiar flutter of nerves that hadn't diminished even after 4 years. Not fear, exactly, more like standing too close to something powerful and unpredictable. A storm or a wild animal, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. He gave a slight nod, acknowledgement that he'd registered my presence, then turned to greet someone important I didn't recognize. I seized the opportunity to escape toward the restroom, suddenly needing a moment away from the intensity of the room, the weight of all these secrets wrapped in expensive suits and false smiles. The hallway leading to the bathrooms was quieter. Blessed relief. I leaned against the cool wall for a moment, pressing my Prosecco glass to my cheek, when I heard footsteps. "Excuse me, miss?" I turned to find a man I didn't recognize, probably mid-30s. with sandy brown hair and an uncertain smile. He wore a gray suit that marked him as someone's guest rather than family, and his whole demeanor screamed lost. "Hi," I said, my natural instinct to be helpful overriding any sense of caution. "Can I help you with something?" "I'm looking for the bathroom." He said it like a question, gesturing vaguely. "This place is like a maze." "Oh, sure, it's just down there." I pointed. "Second door on the right. The first door is a closet, which I only know because I definitely didn't accidentally open it looking for the bathroom last year." He laughed, a genuine sound that made me smile in response. "Thanks. I'm David, by the way. I'm here with my uncle. He does something with shipping?" "Anna," I said, because it seemed rude not to. "I work in the main office. Administrative stuff." "Well, Anna, you're a lifesaver." He started to walk away, then paused. "Hey, would you want to grab a drink? I don't really know anyone here and you seem nice." Before I could explain that I, A, was terrible at small talk, B, had already committed to my 1-hour minimum attendance, and C, wasn't actually looking to socialize, I heard myself say, "Sure, okay," because apparently my mouth operated independently of my brain at social events. We walked back to the main room together, and I let him guide me toward the bar, his hand hovering near my elbow without quite touching. The bartender, Carlo, who I'd helped file his daughter's college application last month, gave me a knowing smile as he poured 2 glasses of Prosecco. "To new friends," David said, raising his glass. "To not accidentally opening closet doors," I replied, and we clinked glasses, both laughing. I didn't see Berto watching from across the room. Didn't notice the exact moment his gaze locked onto me and David. Didn't register the way his jaw tightened or his fingers stilled on his own glass. Didn't realize, in my oblivious attempt at being sociable, that I'd just triggered something I didn't understand in a man who'd spent 4 years keeping his distance. All I knew was that David was telling a funny story about his uncle's shipping business, something about a container of rubber ducks that got mixed up with industrial supplies, and I was genuinely laughing, the kind of laughter that made my shoulders shake and my eyes crinkle. It was just a moment. Just a simple, innocent moment of human connection at a party where everyone else was calculating angles and measuring power. But sometimes, I would learn, moments are all it takes to change everything. The thing about working for Berto for 4 years was that I'd become fluent in his silences. There was the focused silence when he was reading contracts, the dangerous silence before he gave an order that would ruin someone's life, and the contemplative silence when he was 3 moves ahead of everyone else. What I hadn't encountered before, in all those years, was this particular quality of silence. The kind that felt like pressure building before a storm, like the air itself was holding its breath. I felt it the moment I walked into the office Monday morning. "Good morning," I said, as I did every morning, setting his espresso on the corner of his desk with the precise care of someone who'd learned that everything in this office happened exactly so. "You have a conference call at 9 with the Chicago people, lunch with your accountant at noon, and Marco wants 10 minutes sometime this afternoon about the Brooklyn situation." Berto didn't look up from the document he was reading. "Cancel lunch." I paused, my hand halfway to my notepad. In 4 years, Berto had never canceled a meeting with his accountant. Taxes were sacred, the one thing that had taken down bigger men than him. Should I reschedule or just cancel it? His voice was flat, controlled, but underneath I heard something else. Something that made the hair on the back of my neck prickle. "Okay," I said slowly. "Is everything all right?" Why wouldn't it be? It was a dangerous question, the kind that in this office meant back off, but I'd never been particularly good at reading warnings. "You seem tense?" He finally looked up, and the intensity of his gaze made me take an involuntary step back. "Tell me about Saturday night." My mind went blank. Saturday. The party. Oh. What about it? You seemed to enjoy yourself. It wasn't a question, but it felt like one anyway. I tried to replay the evening in my head, searching for whatever had triggered this interrogation. "It was nice," I said carefully. "Teresa looked beautiful. The food was good. I only stayed about an hour." "You left with someone." The words dropped between us like stones. I stared at him, confused. "I left by myself. I took the subway home like always." Before that, his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The man at the bar. David." Understanding dawned, followed immediately by the absurdity of the situation. "The guy who was lost? We had one drink because he didn't know anyone. That's not—" I stopped, because suddenly his behavior made a twisted kind of sense. "Are you asking me about my social life?" "I'm asking about your associations." "My associations," I repeated, feeling my own temper start to rise, which was dangerous, but apparently inevitable. "He was someone's nephew. We talked for maybe 15 minutes. I don't even have his last name." Berto stood, moving around the desk with that predatory grace that reminded me exactly who he was, what he was. "You were laughing. People do that sometimes at parties. It's called being social." The words came out sharper than intended, but I was suddenly angry in a way that surprised me. "What exactly is this about?" He stopped close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and woodsy that probably had an Italian name I couldn't pronounce. "You work for me." "I'm aware. You represent my interests." "During business hours, yes." I held my ground even though every instinct screamed at me to step back. "What I do at a social event, who I talk to, who I laugh with, that's my business." Something flickered across his face, too quick to read. "Is it?" Not a question, a statement, a challenge. "Yes," I said firmly. "It is." We stood there for a moment that stretched too long, the air between us charged with something I didn't want to examine. Then he stepped back, returning to his desk, his expression smoothing into that familiar mask of control. "The Chicago call is in 30 minutes, he said, dismissing me. "Make sure we're not disturbed." I left the office on shaking legs, closing the door behind me with more force than necessary. My desk felt like a sanctuary, familiar and safe, and I collapsed into my chair trying to process what had just happened. Berto had been jealous. The thought was so absurd I almost laughed. Except it wasn't funny. It was complicated and dangerous, and absolutely not something I needed in my life. I'd spent 4 years being exactly what he needed. Efficient, discreet, unobtrusive. I filed his papers and managed his schedule and never ever asked about the dark stains that sometimes appeared on his clothes. I existed in the space between his legitimate business and his actual business, a buffer that kept the outside world at arm's length. But I wasn't his. Not in that way. Not in any way that gave him the right to question who I laughed with at a party. The day proceeded with a tense normalcy. The Chicago call happened. Marco came by for his 10 minutes, which turned into 30 when Berto got into the details of territorial negotiations. I definitely wasn't supposed to understand. Teresa stopped by with paperwork that needed his signature, gave me a knowing look that suggested she'd heard about the morning's confrontation, and left without comment. By 5:30, I was ready to escape. But as I was gathering my things, the intercom on my desk buzzed. "Anna," my office. I contemplated pretending I hadn't heard it, but that was childish and ultimately futile. Berto always got what he wanted, one way or another. He was standing by the window when I entered, hands in his pockets, looking out at the city skyline. The late afternoon sun cast him in silhouette, making him look like something from a painting, all dramatic shadows and sharp lines. "You wanted to see me?" "Sit." He didn't turn around. I sat, perching on the edge of one of the leather chairs, my bag still clutched in my lap like a shield. "Is this going to take long? I have—" "No plans," he finished. You never have plans on Monday nights. You go home, order takeout from the Thai place on the corner, and watch whatever show you're currently working through. He finally turned to face me. This week it's that British detective series, the one with the complicated murders. The accuracy of his knowledge made my stomach flip. Have you been watching me? I'm aware of your routines. He moved to his desk, not sitting but leaning against it, arms crossed. It's my job to be aware. I stopped, because what was it? Creepy, definitely. But also strangely in character for a man who controlled every aspect of his empire with meticulous precision. You're not my keeper, Berto. Aren't I? The question hung in the air, weighted with implications. You work in this office. You know things that could get you killed. You're under my protection whether you acknowledge it or not. Protection from what? I demanded. Random men at parties who ask for directions to the bathroom? His jaw tightened. You don't understand the world you live in. Then explain it to me. I stood, tired of sitting, tired of being talked down to. Because from where I'm standing, you're angry about something that wasn't even a thing. I had one conversation with one person at a party you told me to attend. That's it. There's nothing more to explain. You smiled at him. The words came out low, almost reluctant, and I stared at him in disbelief. So, you smiled at him the way you smile when you're telling one of your jokes. He pushed off the desk, closing the distance between us again. The way you smile at me when you think something is genuinely funny. Understanding crashed over me like cold water. This wasn't about protection or propriety or representing his interests. This was about something else entirely, something I'd never considered in 4 years of working together. Berto, I said carefully. I smile at lots of people. That's just... my face does that sometimes when I'm not being anxious or awkward. Not like that. His voice was quiet, intense. Not with that specific warmth. I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it. Because what could I say? That I'd never noticed? That I didn't mean anything by it? That he was reading too much into a basic social interaction? All of those things were true. But they also sounded hollow, even in my head. This can't happen, I said finally. Whatever you think you're feeling, whatever this is, it can't happen. I'm not asking for anything. Aren't you? I echoed his earlier question back at him. Because it feels like you're asking me to account for my smiles, my conversations, my private life. That's not nothing, Berto. He was quiet for a long moment, and in the silence I could hear the city below, the distant sirens and car horns that formed the constant soundtrack of New York. Finally he said, You're right. I blinked, surprised. Berto didn't admit to being wrong, not about anything. I am? This was inappropriate. He stepped back, creating distance, and I felt the loss of his proximity like a physical thing. It won't happen again. Relief and something else. Something I refused to examine. Washed through me. Okay, good. So we can just... forget about this? Yes. But he was lying. I could hear it in the way the word came out too quickly, too firm. We both knew nothing about this situation was forgettable. I left his office feeling unsettled, the familiar space suddenly foreign. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual, and by the time I reached the street, I was questioning everything. Had I been blind? Had there been signs I'd missed? Or was this truly as sudden for him as it was for me? The Thai place on the corner was busy, but I ordered my usual anyway, waiting by the window while they prepared my pad thai. My reflection stared back at me from the glass, and I studied it like I was seeing myself for the first time. Plain brown hair, brown eyes, average height, average build. Nothing special. Nothing that would catch the attention of a man like Berto, who could have anyone, who probably had people lining up for the privilege of his attention. Except I'd made him laugh, occasionally, with my clumsy attempts at humor. I'd seen him relax, marginally, when I brought his morning espresso exactly how he liked it. I'd stood in his office thousands of times and never felt afraid, even when I probably should have. I'd thought that was just our working relationship, the ease of familiarity after 4 years. But maybe he'd thought it was something else. The food arrived in a plastic bag that was too hot to hold comfortably, and I juggled it on the subway ride to my apartment in Brooklyn. The commute gave me time to think, to try to sort through the tangle of confusion and concern, and if I was honest, a tiny flicker of something else. Because Berto Castellano, the feared head of the Italian Mafia's New York operations, had been jealous over me. Anna, the secretary who couldn't walk across a room without tripping, who made awkward jokes to diffuse tension, who'd survived 4 years in his orbit by being exactly what he needed and nothing more. It should have been terrifying. It should have sent me running. Instead, as I climbed the 3 flights to my small studio apartment, I found myself wondering what it meant that some part of me wasn't entirely opposed to the idea. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls. My phone had been on silent, buried under the pillow where I'd thrown it after finally falling asleep around 2 in the morning. Now, in the gray light of Tuesday dawn, the screen glowed with notifications, all from the same number. Berto's private line, the one that only a handful of people had access to. My stomach dropped. 17 calls meant something was wrong. 17 calls meant blood or police or both. In 4 years, Berto had never called me outside of work hours, not once. Our relationship existed strictly within the boundaries of 9 to 5, occasional weekends when something urgent demanded attention, but never like this. I called back immediately, my hands shaking as I pressed the phone to my ear. He answered on the first ring. "Where were you?" "Asleep," I said, still groggy and confused. "Berto, what's wrong? Is everyone okay?" A pause. Then, "Everyone's fine." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by confusion. "Then why did you call 17 times at—" I checked the timestamps. 3 in the morning? Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice was different, rougher somehow. "I need you to come in early today." "How early?" "Now." I looked down at myself, still in my sleep shirt and shorts. Now as in right this second, or now as in I have time to shower and look like a functioning human. "You have 30 minutes. He hung up. I stared at my phone, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Then I launched into motion, because when Berto said 30 minutes, he meant it with the precision of someone who valued punctuality above almost everything else. 28 minutes later, I was speed walking down the early morning streets of Manhattan, my hair still damp from the world's fastest shower, wearing yesterday's emergency outfit I kept in my gym bag. The office building was mostly dark, the night security guard looking surprised to see me. "Early start, Miss Anna?" "Something like that," I managed, trying to catch my breath from basically running the last 2 blocks. The elevator ride to the top floor felt both too fast and too slow. I'd had no time to prepare, no time to think through what this meant or what I was walking into. The only thing I knew for certain was that something had shifted, irrevocably, and we couldn't pretend otherwise. Berto's office door was open, light spilling into the otherwise dark reception area. I found him at his desk, though found suggested surprise, and there was nothing surprising about his presence. He looked like he'd been there all night, his jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. The first time in 4 years I'd seen him anything less than perfectly composed. "You're here," he said, and I couldn't read his expression. "You told me to be." I set my bag down carefully, hyper-aware of every movement. "What happened? What's so urgent it couldn't wait until normal business hours?" He stood, moving around the desk, and I noticed the scattered papers, the half-empty bottle of scotch that definitely hadn't been there when I left yesterday. I lied. About what? Yesterday, when I said we could forget about it. He stopped in front of me, close enough that I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the fine lines at the corners that suggested he hadn't slept at all. I can't forget about it. My heart hammered against my ribs. Berto, let me finish. His voice was quiet but firm. I've spent 4 years maintaining distance, professional boundaries. It was necessary, strategic. You were my secretary. Nothing more. Was? The past tense made my breath catch. Are, he corrected. But seeing you Saturday night, watching you smile at someone else, laugh with someone else, it made me realize something I've been avoiding. I should have stepped back, should have maintained that distance he was talking about. Instead, I stayed exactly where I was. What did you realize? That I'm terrible at this. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. At acknowledging things that make me vulnerable. At admitting when something matters. And I matter? The question came out smaller than I intended. You've mattered for longer than I want to admit. He reached out, not touching me but close enough that I could feel the warmth of his hand near my face. I called you 17 times because I couldn't stop thinking about you. About the fact that you might have gone home with him. Might have smiled at him again. Might have given him something I've been too controlled to ask for. I didn't, I said softly. Go home with him. I went home alone, like I always do. I ordered pad thai and watched my detective show and fell asleep on the couch. That's my life, Berto. It's not exciting or dramatic. It's just mine. And do you want it to stay that way? The question hung between us, weighted with possibility and danger in equal measure. I thought about my studio apartment, my routines, the carefully constructed life I'd built that was safe and predictable and lonely. Then I thought about 4 years of working alongside this man, learning his patterns, reading his moods, making him laugh with my terrible jokes and awkward observations. I thought about how my day felt incomplete until I delivered his morning espresso, how I'd started anticipating his needs before he voiced them, how somewhere along the way this had stopped being just a job. I don't know, I admitted. This is complicated. Everything about me is complicated. I'm aware. I file your complicated paperwork and schedule your complicated meetings and pretend I don't hear your complicated phone calls. I finally took that step back, needing space to think. But this is different. This is personal, and personal with you means dangerous. I would never let anyone hurt you. That's not the danger I'm worried about. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the office. What happens when this doesn't work? When you get bored or realize I'm not what you thought I was? I lose my job, my income, probably my apartment since I'd have to leave the city. That's my life, Berto. My whole life. Understanding crossed his face. You think I'd fire you. I think you're my boss and you hold all the power and I'm just Anna, who trips over her own feet and makes awkward jokes. What else am I supposed to think? He was quiet for a moment, processing my words. Then he moved to his desk, pulled out a file folder and handed it to me. Open it. I did, confused, and found inside a contract. My contract, but with amendments I'd never seen before. What is this? 3 months ago, I had my lawyers restructure your employment agreement. You have guaranteed employment for 5 years regardless of circumstances, with full severance if either party terminates the relationship. You also have options in the legitimate businesses, enough to make you financially independent. He paused. I did this before Saturday, before I admitted to myself what this was. I stared at the papers, trying to process what he was telling me. Why? Because you're valuable. Not just to me, but to the organization. You understand how things work, how to navigate between legitimate and otherwise, and because... He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. Because I needed to know you were protected, even from me. The vulnerability in that admission made my throat tight. You've been planning this. I've been avoiding this, he corrected. The contract was insurance, a way to protect you while keeping distance. But Saturday night made me realize I was lying to myself. I closed the folder carefully, setting it on his desk. This doesn't change the fundamental problem. You're still my boss. I still work for you. That power dynamic doesn't disappear because you've secured my financial future. No, he agreed. But it does mean you have a choice. Real choice, not coerced by economic necessity. And what choice is that exactly? I asked. Because I'm not hearing a clear question here. He smiled, a real one this time, and it transformed his face. You want me to be direct? I'd appreciate it, yes. Fine. Anna Rossini, will you have dinner with me? The normalcy of the question after everything else almost made me laugh. Dinner. Dinner, he confirmed. Not in this office. Not as my secretary. As two people who've spent 4 years learning each other and might want to explore what that means. What if it means disaster? I challenged. What if we ruin everything we've built? Then we'll deal with it like adults. His expression turned serious. But I need to know if there's something here worth exploring, because the alternative is spending the next 4 years wondering what if. I looked at him, really looked at him, seeing past the fear and the power to the man underneath. The one who called me 17 times because he couldn't sleep. The one who'd protected my employment before admitting his feelings. The one who'd spent 4 years maintaining distance because he thought it was necessary. Okay, I said finally. Okay, dinner, but we're setting ground rules. Such as, at work, we're still professional. No special treatment, no obvious favoritism. I earn my position, not get it handed to me because we're whatever we're becoming. I held up a hand as he started to protest. I mean it, Berto. I need to know I'm here because I'm good at my job, not because you're interested in me. You are good at your job, he said firmly. You're the best secretary I've ever had. That won't change regardless of what happens between us personally. And if this doesn't work, if we realize we're better as boss and secretary than as anything else, then we figure it out together. He moved closer again, and this time when he reached out, he actually touched me, his fingers gentle under my chin. I'm not going to fire you, Anna. I'm not going to punish you for being honest about what does or doesn't work. That's not who I am. You're a Mafia boss, I pointed out. Punishment is literally part of your job description. For people who betray me, yes. You're not one of those people. His thumb brushed my cheek, and I felt the touch all the way to my toes. You're the one person who's been consistently honest with me, even when it would have been easier to lie. That was true. I'd told him when his strategies were stupid, when his temper was counterproductive, when his tie didn't match his suit, and he'd never once punished me for it. Dinner, I said, the word both acceptance and question. When? Tonight? At my surprised look, he added, unless you have plans. You know I don't have plans. I tried to sound annoyed but couldn't quite manage it. Fine. Tonight. But somewhere normal, not some place where everyone knows who you are. There's nowhere in this city where people don't know who I am. Then we go to Brooklyn, my neighborhood, where people care more about rent prices than organized crime. He considered this. Brooklyn. Your territory. Yes. And we're taking the subway. Now he looked genuinely alarmed. The subway. Unless you want me to believe you're afraid of public transportation. I smiled sweetly. Or is the great Berto Castellano too important for the F train? I'm not afraid, he said, rising to the challenge. Fine. Subway, Brooklyn, your choice of restaurant. Good. I grabbed my bag, suddenly needing to escape before the reality of what I'd just agreed to could catch up with me. I need to go pretend to work now and not think about the fact that I just agreed to go on a date with my mob boss. Technically, we've been working together for years, he pointed out. This is just adding another dimension. A terrifying dimension that could get me killed by jealous rivals or arrested as an accessory or... Anna. His voice cut through my spiral. Breathe, I breathed. Sorry. I panic when things get weird. I've noticed. His expression softened. We'll take this slow. One dinner. One conversation. Nothing has to be decided tonight. Except whether you can handle the subway, I couldn't resist adding. I've killed men for less insolence. But not me, I said with more confidence than I felt. But not you, he agreed, and there was something in his voice that made my stomach flip. I left his office feeling simultaneously terrified and exhilarated, like I'd just jumped off a cliff with no idea if there was water below. The sun was just starting to rise, casting the city in shades of gold and pink. And for the first time in 4 years, I had no idea what came next. All I knew was that tonight, I had a date with the most dangerous man I'd ever met. And I was actually looking forward to it. Berto did, in fact, survive the subway. Though survive might be too strong a word for the experience of watching a man accustomed to private cars and drivers navigate the crowded, delayed, overheated chaos of the F train during evening rush hour. He stood the entire ride despite available seats, his hand wrapped around the pole with the kind of white-knuckled grip that suggested he was fighting every instinct to call his driver. You're doing great, I said encouragingly as we lurched to a stop at Bergen Street. I hate this, he replied, but there was a hint of amusement in his voice. Everyone hates this. That's part of the authentic Brooklyn experience. I led him up the stairs to street level, into the warm September evening. There's a Greek place 2 blocks from here. Small, family-owned, incredible food. And most importantly, nobody there knows who you are. You're certain? The owner thinks I work in insurance, which, technically, I kind of do. Just very specialized insurance. The restaurant, Dimitri's, was exactly as I'd described. Small, crowded, with mismatched tables and a menu written on a chalkboard. The owner, an elderly Greek man with a magnificent mustache, greeted me with his usual enthusiasm. Anna, my favorite customer. And you bring a friend, excellent. He turned to Berto, clearly delighted. You are a lucky man, this one. She appreciates good food. Berto, to his credit, handled the enthusiastic greeting with grace. I'm beginning to realize how lucky. We were seated at a corner table, slightly removed from the other diners, and for a moment, we just looked at each other, the strangeness of the situation settling over us. 4 years of professional distance, and now here we were, on a date in a Greek restaurant in Brooklyn. This is weird, I said finally. Profoundly weird, he agreed, but also kind of nice. Also kind of nice, he conceded. He'd left his suit jacket somewhere, probably folded in his office, and rolled up his sleeves in a concession to the restaurant's warmth. It was the most casual I'd ever seen him, and it was doing strange things to my equilibrium. The waiter brought water and bread, and I ordered for both of us because I actually knew what was good here. Berto watched me with an expression I couldn't quite read. What? I asked, suddenly self-conscious. You're comfortable here. More comfortable than I've ever seen you in the office. I tore a piece of bread, considering this. The office is your territory. This is mine. Makes sense, I'd be more relaxed. Tell me about it, he said. Your territory, your life outside work. I know your routines, but not the context. So I did. I told him about my small studio apartment, the neighbor who played guitar at odd hours, the bodega cat I'd named, but who definitely already had a name. I told him about my parents upstate, how I called them every Sunday, how they thought I worked in legitimate import-export, and I'd never corrected them. They'd be horrified if they knew the truth, I admitted. My dad was a high school teacher. My mom worked at the library. Very normal, very safe lives. They wanted that for me too. But you chose differently. I chose a job that paid well and didn't ask too many questions about my lack of experience. I smiled. The fact that my boss turned out to be terrifyingly competent and occasionally murder-adjacent was a surprise. Occasionally? He asked dryly. I'm being generous with my estimates. The food arrived, and for a few minutes we ate in comfortable silence. The moussaka was perfect, as always, and I watched Berto's expression shift to surprised appreciation. This is excellent, he admitted. I know. I've been coming here for 3 years and haven't found anything on the menu that isn't amazing. I paused. Now your turn. Tell me something I don't know about you. He set down his fork, considering. What do you want to know? Anything, everything. We've worked together for 4 years, but I barely know anything about you beyond the obvious. At his questioning look, I elaborated. I know you take your espresso black. You hate mornings. You have a tell when you're about to fire someone. But I don't know the person underneath all that. What's the tell? You crack your knuckles. 3 times, very precisely. I demonstrated. I started warning people when I noticed it. Probably saved a few lives. He smiled, a genuine one. That's surprisingly observant. I told you, I'm good at my job. You are. He took a sip of water, gathering his thoughts. My father started the family business. He was. He paused, searching for words. He was a violent man, effective, but violent. He believed respect came from fear. But you don't. I believe respect comes from competence and consistency. Fear is a tool, but it's not sustainable as a primary strategy. He met my eyes. You're not afraid of me. Should I be? No. But most people are, and it becomes exhausting. Performing that role constantly, being the person everyone fears. His expression softened. You've never treated me that way. From day one, you've treated me like a person who happens to run a criminal empire, not a criminal who happens to be a person. Is there a difference? To me, yes, a significant one. The waiter cleared our plates and brought baklava, Dimitri's specialty. I dug in immediately, savoring the honey and pistachios, while Berto watched with amusement. What? I asked around a mouthful. You have honey on your nose. I wiped at it, missing. He reached across the table, his thumb brushing the spot gently, and the simple touch sent electricity through me. Our eyes met, and suddenly the restaurant felt very small, very warm. Anna, he said quietly. I want to be clear about something. Okay. This isn't casual for me. Whatever this becomes, it matters. His hand was still on my face, thumb now tracing my cheekbone. I don't do things halfway. If we're doing this, I'm all in. My heart was hammering so hard I was certain he could hear it. That's intense. I'm an intense person. I've noticed. I covered his hand with mine, holding it against my face. I need you to understand something too. I'm not. I'm not interesting or sophisticated or any of the things you're probably used to. I'm just Anna. I watch detective shows and order too much takeout and trip over my own feet. That's what you're getting. I know exactly what I'm getting. His voice was warm. I've been watching you for 4 years, remember? I know you sing off-key when you think no one's listening. I know you keep a drawer of candy in your desk for rough days. I know you cry at sappy commercials, but keep your composure during actual crises. You've been paying attention. Since day one. He pulled his hand back, and I felt the loss. I just didn't let myself acknowledge what that meant. We left the restaurant an hour later, full and slightly dazed by the evening's honesty. The walk back to the subway was slower this time, both of us reluctant for the night to end. "Thank you," Berto said as we waited on the platform, "for bringing me here, for showing me your world. Thank you for getting on the subway without complaining more than 5 times. It was 6 times, but who's counting?" The train arrived, less crowded now, and we found seats together. His thigh pressed against mine in the limited space, and I was hyper-aware of every point of contact. "Can I ask you something?" I said, as the train lurched into motion. "Anything. The contract changes, the ones you made 3 months ago. What made you do that?" He was quiet for a moment. "You had a terrible day. Do you remember? That Friday in June when everything went wrong." I did remember. A deal had fallen through, someone had betrayed the family, and Berto had been in a fury all day. I'd made 17 separate phone calls, canceled 6 meetings, and personally delivered bad news to 3 different people who'd looked like they wanted to kill the messenger. I remember. You stayed late. Everyone else had fled, but you stayed. And when I finally emerged from my office at midnight, you were still at your desk, organizing files, preparing for Monday. He looked at me. I asked why you were still there, and you said, "Because you needed me to be." Just that. No resentment, no expectation of recognition, just simple acknowledgement of what needed to be done. It was my job. It was beyond your job, and I realized in that moment that I'd been taking you for granted, that you were essential to my operation in ways I hadn't fully acknowledged. The contract changes were my way of protecting that, of protecting you. Even though you couldn't admit why you were really doing it. Even though, he agreed. We rode in companionable silence for a few stops. Then I said, "This is my stop coming up. I'll walk you home. It's Brooklyn. You'll get murdered." He gave me a look. "Anna." "Right, you're the one who does the murdering. I always forget." I stood as the train slowed. "You really don't have to walk me. It's only 3 blocks. I'm walking you," he said firmly. So he did, his hand eventually finding mine in the dark streets, his presence solid and unexpectedly comforting beside me. When we reached my building, I turned to face him on the stoop. "So," I said, suddenly nervous. "That was dinner." "That was dinner," he agreed. "Can we do it again? The Greek place or the whole thing?" "The whole thing. Different restaurant, same company." I smiled. "Yeah, I'd like that." He stepped closer, and I knew he was going to kiss me. I should have been nervous, should have overthought it. But instead, I just tilted my face up and met him halfway. The kiss was gentle, questioning. Nothing like the intensity I would have expected from him. His lips were soft against mine, his hand cupping my face with careful tenderness. It felt like a promise and a question all at once. When we broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. "Good night, Anna." "Good night, Berto." I watched him walk back toward the subway, his figure eventually disappearing around the corner. Then I climbed the stairs to my apartment, let myself in, and collapsed on my couch, my fingers touching my lips where he'd kissed me. I'd just had a date with the Mafia boss, and it had been, impossibly, perfectly normal. The next 3 weeks were a study in compartmentalization. At work, we maintained our professional dynamic with only minor slips. He still barked orders. I still organized his life with meticulous efficiency. The only difference was the way his eyes would linger on me for just a moment too long when he thought no one was looking, or how my pulse would jump when his hand brushed mine passing documents. Outside work, we existed in a different reality entirely. We had dinner at a hole-in-wall Thai place in Queens. We caught a late movie at a rundown theater in the Bronx, where no one from his world would think to look. We took the subway to Coney Island on a Sunday afternoon, and I watched Berto eat a hot dog with the same precise concentration he applied to dismantling rivals. "You're staring," he said, mustard on his chin. "You have food on your face." He wiped it away with a napkin. "Better?" "Much. Though you looked more human with the mustard." "I'll try to spill more condiments for your entertainment." These moments of normalcy felt stolen. Precious. We existed in a bubble where he wasn't a crime boss, and I wasn't his secretary. Just two people learning each other's rhythms, preferences, the small details that made up a life. I learned that he was allergic to shellfish, but had never told anyone because he thought it made him look weak. That he read literary fiction in Italian before bed, translations never quite capturing the nuance. That his mother had died when he was 16, and he'd never forgiven his father for remarrying 6 months later. He learned that I'd wanted to be a teacher before student loans made that financially impossible. That I had a terror of heights masked by false confidence. That I still slept with a nightlight, because complete darkness made me anxious. "You're afraid of the dark," he'd said one evening in my apartment, noticing the small lamp I kept on. "Not afraid. Uncomfortable. There's a difference." "Tell me." So I did. I told him about being locked in a closet as a child during hide and seek, how the darkness had felt suffocating, how even now enclosed dark spaces made my chest tight. I told him things I'd never told anyone, and he listened with the same intense focus he brought to everything. "I'll remember that," he'd said simply, and I knew he would. It was week 4 when things shifted again. I was working late, organizing files for an upcoming meeting, when raised voices from Berto's office caught my attention. This wasn't unusual. Heated discussions were part of the business, but something about the tone made me pause. "You're making a mistake." Marco's voice, urgent and angry. "This weakness you're showing, it's making people question your judgment. My personal life is not your concern." Berto, cold and controlled. "It is when your personal life affects business decisions." A pause. "The girl has made you soft." The silence that followed was dangerous. I'd heard that quality of silence before, the kind that preceded violence. "Choose your next words very carefully, Marco. I'm choosing them for your benefit. The men are talking. They see you distracted, making exceptions, showing favoritism. This secretary of yours, Anna." Berto's voice was sharp. "Her name is Anna." "Anna," Marco corrected with audible disdain. "She's a liability, a weakness others will exploit." I should have stopped listening, should have given them privacy. Instead, I stayed frozen at my desk, barely breathing. "Is that a threat?" Berto asked, each word precise. "It's a warning, from someone who's been loyal to you for 10 years. You want to fuck around with your secretary? Fine. But don't let it compromise what we've built." The sound of a chair scraping back. Footsteps. Then Berto's voice, low and lethal. "You're right about one thing. You have been loyal for 10 years, which is the only reason you're still breathing right now. But if you ever speak about Anna that way again, loyalty won't save you. Berto, get out." Marco emerged from the office moments later, his face flushed with anger. He saw me at my desk and sneered. "Enjoy it while it lasts, sweetheart. Men like him always move on to the next pretty thing." "Marco." Berto stood in his doorway, and something in his expression made Marco blanch. "Leave, now." Once Marco was gone, Berto turned to me. "How much did you hear?" "Enough." I stood, my legs unsteady. "Is he right? Am I making you look weak?" "No." But people are talking. People always talk. He moved toward me. That's what people do in this business. They look for weakness, for leverage. It doesn't mean anything. It means something if it puts you at risk. I wrapped my arms around myself. Maybe Marco's right. Maybe we should... Don't. He cut me off, his hands on my shoulders. Don't let him get in your head. This is exactly what he wants. To create doubt. To drive a wedge between us. Why would he want that? Berto's expression darkened. Because he was hoping to position his nephew for greater responsibility. Your competence has made that impossible. This isn't really about you and me. It's about power and succession, and all the ugly politics that come with this life. I looked up at him, seeing the truth in his eyes. That doesn't make me less of a liability. It makes you valuable. There's a difference. His thumbs traced circles on my shoulders. I need you to trust me on this. I've survived in this world for 20 years by being smarter, more ruthless, and more strategic than everyone around me. I'm not going to let anyone threaten what matters to me. And I matter? You matter more than you realize. He pulled me closer, his forehead resting against mine. I'm not good at this. At expressing feelings. At being vulnerable. But you need to understand that you're not a distraction or a weakness. You're the only thing keeping me human. The words settled into me, heavy with meaning. I thought about the past month, about how he'd softened in small ways, laughed more easily, shown glimpses of the person beneath the armor. Okay, I said finally. I trust you. Good. He kissed me, deeper than our previous tentative explorations, and I melted into it, letting go of the fear Marco's words had planted. When we broke apart, he said, "Stay tonight, at my place." It wasn't a question, but it felt like one. I knew what he was asking, what it meant to cross that particular threshold. "Berto, not for that," he interrupted. "Just stay. I want to wake up knowing you're safe, that you're there. That's all." The vulnerability in his voice decided me. "Okay, but I need to go home first, get some things." "I'll come with you." So we took the subway to Brooklyn, both of us quiet, processing the evening's revelations. My apartment felt smaller with him in it, his presence filling the space in ways I'd never considered. "This is where you live," he said, taking in the small studio with its mismatched furniture and overflowing bookshelves. "I know it's not much. It's perfect." He picked up a framed photo from my desk. "Your parents?" "Yeah, that was taken at my college graduation." He studied it for a long moment. "You look happy." I was. That was before student loans and reality set in. I grabbed a bag from my closet, throwing in basics. Before I ended up working for the Mafia. "Any regrets?" I paused, considering the question seriously. "No. Surprisingly, no." We took a car service back to his penthouse, my first time seeing where he actually lived. The space was exactly what I'd expected. Modern, expensive, impeccably clean. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the city that probably cost more than I made in a year. "Guest room is through there," he said, pointing, "but I'd prefer if you stayed with me." "Just sleeping," I confirmed. "Just sleeping," he agreed. His bedroom was as precisely organized as everything else in his life. The bed was enormous, covered in dark sheets that probably had a thread count I couldn't comprehend. I changed in his bathroom, acutely aware of my drugstore pajamas in this temple of expensive masculine taste. When I emerged, he was already in bed, reading something in Italian on his tablet. He looked up as I approached, and his expression softened in a way I was beginning to recognize. "Come here." I slid in beside him, and he pulled me close, my head resting on his chest. His heartbeat was steady under my ear, grounding. "Anna?" he said after a few minutes of silence. Yeah? Thank you. For what? For trusting me. For being here. For not running when you probably should have. I tilted my head up to look at him. Where would I run to? Anywhere. Away from this life, this danger, this complicated mess. Maybe, I admitted. But then I'd never know what we could be. He kissed the top of my head, a gesture so tender it made my chest ache. What we could be, he repeated. I like that. We fell asleep like that, tangled together, and for the first time in 4 years, I felt completely safe in a world I'd entered terrified. The next morning, I woke to find him already up, standing by the windows in nothing but his boxers, watching the city wake. The early light painted him in shades of gold, highlighting the lean muscle of his back, and I took a moment just to appreciate the view. You're staring again, he said without turning around. You're worth staring at. He smiled at that, glancing over his shoulder. Coffee? God, yes. His kitchen was as pristine as the rest of the apartment, and he moved through it with the same efficiency he brought to everything. The espresso machine probably cost more than my rent, and the coffee it produced was perfection. I could get used to this, I admitted, cradling the cup. Good, because I'm not planning to let you go. The words should have scared me, should have triggered all my carefully maintained defenses. Instead, they felt like coming home. Berto? I said, as he moved to stand beside me at the counter. Yeah? About Marco, about what he said. I took a breath. If it becomes a problem for your business, if it puts you at risk, it won't. But if it does... He turned to face me, his expression serious. Then I'll handle it. That's what I do, Anna. I handle problems. But you are not a problem. You're the solution to a question I didn't know I was asking. What question? Whether there's more to life than power and fear and constant vigilance. He set down his cup, taking my face in his hands. With you, I get to be just Berto. Not the boss, not the feared criminal, just me. That's worth protecting. I kissed him then, coffee-flavored and morning sweet, and felt something settle into place. This was real. Whatever we were building, it was real. And I was all in. The annual company gathering came around again, exactly 1 year after the event that had set everything in motion. This time, I arrived on Berto's arm, a statement that surprised no one who'd been paying attention, but still caused ripples through the assembled crowd. Teresa greeted us at the door with a knowing smile. About time you two made it official. Were we that obvious? I asked. Honey, he's been watching you like a hawk watches prey for 4 years. The only surprise is that it took this long. Berto's hand rested at the small of my back, possessive but gentle. Over the past 5 months, that touch had become familiar, grounding. I'd moved into his penthouse 3 weeks ago. My small studio apartment now just a memory of a life that felt increasingly distant. There they are. Marco's voice cut through the ambient noise, and I felt Berto tense beside me. Relations had been strained since that confrontation months ago, professional but cool. The happy couple. Marco, Berto acknowledged with a nod. I wanted to apologize, Marco continued, his expression sincere, for what I said back then. I was out of line. Yes, you were, Berto agreed, his voice neutral. I was worried about the business, about perception. But I've watched how you two work together. How he looked at me. How you've made him better at what he does. More strategic, less reactive. I was wrong. The apology caught me off guard. Thank you for saying that. Don't thank me. You earned the respect. Marco extended his hand to Berto. We good? After a moment's consideration, Berto shook it. We're good. As Marco moved away, I leaned into Berto. That was unexpected. He's smart enough to recognize when he's on the wrong side of inevitability. Inevitability? I questioned. You and me. This was always inevitable. He pulled me closer, even when I was fighting it. The evening progressed smoothly. I mingled with people who no longer saw me as just the secretary, but as something more, something integral to Berto's operation. It was strange and empowering in equal measure. I need to speak with the Chicago people, Berto murmured at one point. Will you be all right on your own for a few minutes? I managed to survive before you. I think I can handle 10 minutes. He kissed my temple. I'll be quick. I watched him navigate toward a group of serious-looking men in expensive suits, already shifting into his business persona. The transformation was subtle, but complete, a reminder of the world we inhabited. He's different with you, you know. I turned to find an older woman I didn't recognize, elegant in a navy dress, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. I'm sorry, have we met? Isabella Castellano, Berto's aunt. She smiled at my surprise. He doesn't talk about his family much, I understand. We're complicated. Most families are. True. She studied me with the same intensity as her nephew. But you're good for him. He's been carrying the weight of this life since he was too young. You've given him something else to care about besides survival and succession. I don't know about that. I do. I've watched him transform from a boy forced to be a man into a man who forgot how to be human. You've reminded him. She squeezed my hand. Whatever Marco or anyone else says, don't let them convince you you're a liability. You're the best thing that's happened to this family in decades. Before I could respond, Berto returned, his expression tightening when he saw his aunt. Isabella. Nephew. She kissed both his cheeks with European formality. I was just telling your lovely Anna how good she is for you. You shouldn't be here. It's a family gathering. Last I checked, I'm still family. Her smile was all teeth. Relax, Berto. I'm not here to cause problems. I genuinely wanted to meet the woman who accomplished what we all thought impossible. What's that? I asked, curious despite the tension. Making him smile. She touched my cheek affectionately, then moved away, leaving us in confused silence. What was that about? I asked. Family politics. Long story, most of it ugly. He pulled me toward the exit. Let's get out of here. I've shown face enough for one night. We ended up at our Greek restaurant, Dimitri greeting us with his usual enthusiasm. It had become our spot, the place where we could be just Berto and Anna, without the weight of his world pressing down. So, I said once we'd ordered, your aunt seems interesting. Isabella is complicated. She had her own ideas about how things should be run after my father died. We disagreed, violently, metaphorically speaking. And now? Now she's accepted that I'm in charge and she's not, but she still likes to remind everyone that she was passed over. He sipped his wine. Her approval of you is genuine, though. That I didn't expect. Is that important? Her approval? In this family, everything's important. Every alliance, every endorsement, every perceived weakness. His expression darkened. Which is why I need to talk to you about something. My stomach dropped. That sounds ominous. Not ominous. Just necessary. He took my hand across the table. There are people who will always see you as a way to get to me, who will look at what we have and see opportunity for leverage. I know that. Knowing it and living with it are different things. His grip tightened. I've made arrangements, security protocols, safe houses, people whose job it is to ensure nothing happens to you. But you need to understand what you're signing up for. I've been working for you for 4 years. I know what this life looks like. Working for me and being with me are entirely different levels of exposure. He leaned forward, intensity radiating from him. I need to know you're all in, Anna, that you understand and accept what this means. I thought about the past year, about how my life had transformed from small and safe to large and complicated, about how I'd gone from ordering takeout alone to falling asleep in the arms of one of the most dangerous men in New York. I'm all in, I said firmly. Have been since that first dinner when you survived the subway without complaining. I complained 6 times. Exactly. Showed admirable restraint. I squeezed his hand. But seriously, Berto, I'm not going anywhere. You've got me. Relief washed over his face, followed by something that looked suspiciously like emotion. I love you. I don't think I've said that yet. The words hung in the air between us, precious and terrifying. You haven't. Well, I do. Love you. In case that wasn't clear. I laughed, the sound bubbling up unexpectedly. You're terrible at this. I'm aware. Lucky for me, you seem to find my terrible romantic skills endearing. I find everything about you endearing, even the murder. Especially the murder? Let's not push it. I stood, moving around the table to kiss him properly. But yes, the murder too. All of it. The whole complicated, dangerous, absurd package. I love you too. By the way, I added when we broke apart. Thought you should know. His smile was radiant, transforming his face into something almost boyish. I had hoped. We finished dinner in the warm glow of confession, then walked slowly back toward his penthouse, neither of us ready for the night to end. The city hummed around us, oblivious to our small drama, and I thought about how strange it was that my life had led me here. What are you thinking? Berto asked, reading my silence. That a year ago I accidentally toasted a stranger and you got jealous. I prefer strategically concerned. You froze like a jealous boyfriend. I had no framework for understanding what I was feeling, he defended. You smiled at him. It was unacceptable. And now? Now I've accepted that you're going to smile at people. As long as you come home to me, I can live with it. Such growth. I'm proud of you. We reached his building, and the doorman nodded respectfully as we entered. The elevator ride up was silent but comfortable, his arm around my shoulders, my head resting against his chest. Anna? He said as we entered the apartment. Yeah? Thank you. For what? For not running. For staying. For being exactly who you are. Clumsy and funny and the only person who's ever really seen me. I pulled him down for a kiss, pouring everything I felt into it. When we finally broke apart, I said, Where else would I go? You're home now. His eyes shone with something that looked suspiciously like tears, though he'd never admit it. Home, he repeated. I like that. Later, as we lay tangled together in his enormous bed, I thought about Marco's words from months ago. About weakness and liability, and all the ways this relationship could complicate his life. But lying there, listening to Berto's steady heartbeat, feeling safer than I'd ever felt, I realized that maybe love wasn't about avoiding complications. Maybe it was about finding someone worth being complicated for. Berto? I whispered, not sure if he was still awake. I'm really glad I accidentally texted that stranger. His chest rumbled with silent laughter. Me too, amore mio. Me too. And in the darkness of his bedroom, wrapped in the arms of New York's most feared Mafia boss, I finally understood what home meant. Not a place, but a person. Not safety from the world, but safety in spite of it. We'd built something real in the spaces between power and vulnerability, between danger and domesticity. Something that had started with jealousy and grown into something neither of us could have predicted. Something inevitable.